Hi everyone. We're going to be doing something a little bit different for this intro since the subject matter of the episode does kind of necessitate it. We were initially going to do a whole bit with Craig, so yeah. But also we were going to introduce a new character, Craig's little sister, Tina. However, this episode is going to get pretty heavy. We got a lot of complicated subject matter in both the thing itself, with our special guest host, and also with our guest star for the interview. So we figured that with a Craig bit, it might not be fitting for that sort of subject matter. We're crass, well, Craig, but we're not unethical. Also, not making excuses, just giving a bit of an update. I am currently in the mid-semester grind of both of my degrees at UT. The director is currently going through grad school, and Round Rock came down with a minor case of tornado. If you want to know more, check the special report that we released a little while back. With all that being said, enjoy the show.
Recorded in Round Rock, Texas, in front of a live teleconferenced audience, it's the What's Update with Xander IMDb.
Season 3, Crackpots, Karens, and Robber Barons.
Bring it, mammal! Welcome to the What's Update. I'm Xander IMDb. We have a lot to get through, so let's get started. Sick of changing your clocks every 6 months? Well, you might not have to worry about that for much longer. In a surprise vote, the Senate voted to unanimously switch to permanent daylight savings time. Woo! The bill, called the Sunshine Protection Act, if passed in the House of Representatives and signed into law by President Biden, would take effect in November of 2023. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell signaled his support by letting his head fall back into its shell. Now, if you thought we were running out of bad omens to cover over the past 3 seasons, you ain't seen nothing yet. Over in Japan, a large volcanic rock, known colloquially as Seisho Seki, or Killing Stone, has split down the middle. In other news, we've gotten reports of unexpected crow migrations, La Llorona has left her river, and you've received a mysterious N64 cartridge in the mail. Probably nothing. Legend has it that the stone held the spirit of Tamamo no Mai, a demon woman who attempted to overthrow the Emperor of Japan in the early 12th century CE. If this spirit happens to tune into this show, I would be happy to propose some worthy new candidates for cursing and or overthrowing.
Definitely.
Now, since we're on the subject of things that inspire cursing, thankfully, that's the level of the room today, folks. Live audience. The subject of things that inspire cursing, thankfully, a Texas state court temporarily halted child abuse investigations by Child Protective Services on parents with transgender children.
Woo!
Judge Amy Clark Meacham of Travis County issued an injunction saying that the policy, ordered by Governor Greg Shitheel on Wheels Abbott, had been improperly adopted and violated the Texas Constitution. Republicans violating the state constitution in Texas? We just call that Wednesday. Yeah. Actor Alec Baldwin filed documents in arbitration over the shooting death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins last October. The filing claims Baldwin was not responsible for Hutchins' death because he was told that there was no live ammunition in the gun and that he was not responsible for checking the ammunition or for firearm safety on the set with prop firearms that are dangerous. But maybe so, but he really just should have listened to the advice that Sean Connery gave him in The Hunt for Red October. Be careful which things you shoot at. Most things in here don't react too well to bullets.
That was a garbage.
Look, I don't have a Connery, so I'm just going with Angus MacGuffin, okay?
Fine, I guess, whatever.
Alright.
Hold it together.
The Biden administration has proposed new limits and regulations from the Environmental Protection Agency to crack down on tailpipe emissions. Under the EPA rule, heavy-duty trucks have to cut down their emissions of nitrogen dioxide, an emission linked with lung cancer and heart disease, by 90%.
Yeah.
The law would also require a cut down of truck emissions of carbon dioxide, which is one of the main greenhouse gases contributing to global climate change. Of course, if the Biden administration really wants to cut down on toxic emissions, they'd actually have to go through the FCC to shut down Fox News.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. Get rid of them.
Yeah.
Do that.
Squiffy motherfucker.
We're getting multi-levels of government here.
Yeah, buddy.
Now, speaking of seditionists and traitors, documents found during the arrest of Enrique Tarrio, leader of the fascist Proud Boys group, detailed plans to assault and occupy 6 House and Senate buildings and the Supreme Court.
Damn.
Tarrio has been charged with conspiracy, as the plans closely mirror the actions taken by the pro-Trump mob during the January 6th insurrection. I can see the to-do list now. What to do on my DC vacation? 1. Have a good chuckle outside the U.S. Holocaust Museum.
Oh.
Number 2, hawk a big fat loogie on the statue of Abraham Lincoln.
Is that necessary?
And 3, overthrow democracy.
Yeah.
According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the 2020 census under President Twitler significantly undercounted Hispanic, Black, and Native American residents, while overcounting white and Asian Americans. The Bureau says the population total of 323 million was accurate, but the counting of minorities is skewed, all of which would alter their representation in government business or local economics. I guess the cracker calculus question of the day is, how many fifths of a person did the Native Americans and Hispanics count for?
Oh, damn.
Whichever math course gets applied, you know that any benefits for minorities will end up being in imaginary numbers.
Oh, math jokes.
Nerd. Even worse, depressing math jokes.
Oh.
All math is depressing.
You got me there.
It's true.
A JetBlue pilot was pulled out of the cockpit in Buffalo, New York, after appearing intoxicated. In custody, his sobriety test indicated that his blood alcohol limit content was over 4 times more than the federal limit for pilots. But wait. There's a federal limit for drunkenness for airline pilots that's above 0?
It's like,
That doesn't make me feel good about flying anytime soon. When asked for comment, our resident drunk snake correspondent, Craig Scales, said,
I don't know, man. You gotta wash those buffalo wings down with something. Try tequila.
I don't think we're sending the right messages here.
never when Craig's involved.
Yep. We should get his sister in here. That'll keep him in check. Congress has finally voted to make lynching a federal hate crime. The Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act is named for the 14-year-old black teenager who, in 1955, was tortured and murdered in Mississippi after a white woman claimed he whistled at her and touched her. It's taken 67 years to get this passed. And come on, lawmakers, why you gotta leave people hanging like that?
Oh.
But wait, what the fuck? Who wrote this?
What is up, Mamo?
God damn it, Craig!
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
Alright,
Damn. That snake's wrong.
and somehow more irritating than that. It took 67 years for this to get passed, but everybody just immediately hopped on to, I think we can take out daylight savings time. Like, get your fucking priorities straight, guys.
Right. Clear skies.
Clear skies, clear skies, clear skies.
Okay.
And references. Now, on a lighter note, in our continuing coverage of Dixie Pixie, living legend, and national treasure, Miss Dolly Parton, we present our recurring segment, Dolly Watch.
Yeah, buddy.
Anyone that follows the career and life of Miss Parton knows that she is a country legend, a savvy entrepreneur, and an unfaltering philanthropist, and a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominee? Yeah, you heard that right. Miss Dolly is on the newest list of potential Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees, alongside other music legends like Pat Benatar, Duran Duran, Rage Against the Machine, and Eminem. In the dolliest way possible, Miss Parton respectfully declined the nomination and asked to be removed from contention, writing, "Even though I am extremely flattered and grateful to be nominated, I don't feel I've entirely earned that right. I really do not want votes to be split because of me." She goes on to ask for their understanding and hopes that they might consider her again in the future if she is, quote, ever worthy.
What?
man.
Worthy?
She's adorable.
She's a,
I can't think of any more worthiness.
she should get all the awards.
Now, the downside is that though her beautiful visage may never grace those halls in Cleveland, it did seem to inspire her to put out a great rock and roll album in the future. We will wait patiently to rock out to her first single.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stick around, we'll be right back.
Yeah.
Welcome back, everybody. At some point in your life, you probably found yourself staring at a plate of what can only be described as yuck. Now, my personal brand of I ain't eating that nasty shit is fairly broad. At least there's now a genetic excuse for finding cilantro disgusting, so we can chalk that one up to goddamn Planet Squares. But there's still a metric shit ton of so-called food-type items that I just flatly refuse to engage with. Cauliflower, cherry-flavored anything, asparagus, coconut, black licorice, and raisins, just to name a few. This list is in no way comprehensive. It's as varied as the reasons that I won't eat these things. Cauliflower smells like feet and looks like shriveled brains. Cherry-flavored things don't taste anything like actual cherries, or even maraschino cherries. They taste like feet. Asparagus smells like piss and looks like embryonic Groots. The texture of... Yeah, that image is gotta be in your mind. The texture of coconut is wonky and gets stuck in my retainer. And if I wanted to taste black licorice, I would just drink Jägermeister. Or if I'm feeling exceptionally self-destructive, NyQuil. And raisins look like desiccated flies. Parents at the dawn of time probably told their grossed out kids, how do you know you don't like pterodactyl if you won't even try it? That's a really dumb thing to say. How would somebody feel if someone tried to guilt them into eating something that the smell or sight of them makes them... Research by Susan Mays, chief psychologist and professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Penn State College of Medicine, found that atypical eating behaviors were present in 70% of children with autism, which is 15 times more common than in neurotypical children. Maybe your kid isn't just a picky eater, maybe they're trying to tell you something. So here's the thing. Studies indicate that between 30 and 40% of the population are thought to be neurodiverse. This designation covers people on the autism scale, as well as conditions like ADHD, OCD, BPD, dyslexia, bipolar disorder, Tourette's, and schizophrenia. Neurodiversity refers to the concept that certain attributes formerly viewed as developmental disorders are in fact normal variations in the brain. And people who have these features also have certain strengths. I mean, you know what, I'm really not the right person to talk about this topic. Alright, hang on a second. Summoning spell! This is Roach. They're one of our writers, and we're going to let them cover this topic.
Hey!
Hi. I'm Roach. They, them, autistic, ADHD, asexual, genderqueer, and nerdy. A lovely basket of odd. And you know, I really appreciate being dragged in on this one. Nothing about us without us, eh? I'll be speaking from my own experiences. Any person you know with a neurodiverse brain will have their own experiences and preferences. We're going to call this one simple things that you can do to be a good friend or colleague to the neurodiverse. Zan brought up food, so let's start there. Lots of neurodiverse folks have a complicated relationship with food. From what I hear, for a neurotypical person, it's mostly, I need to put sustenance in my body. Oh hey, there's sustenance. I'm going to put it in my body. And they do, and it's done. Oh, that would be lovely to experience. For myself, and for many other indie that's neurodiverse for the cool kids, food isn't just sustenance. It's texture, it's flavor intensity, it's appearance. Sure, all of these things matter to me too, I pretend to hear you saying through your interweb device.
You hear them too.
Right? But it doesn't stop you, but does it stop you from being able to eat the thing? They'll eat it when they get hungry enough. Guess what? Many of us won't. We can't. Our brain won't let us. Have you ever been so hungry to the point that you're at tears while surrounded by a pantry full of stuff that everyone else in the world seems to think is a perfectly edible food, But for you, your brain tells you that it might as well be the tire on the wheelbarrow out back. It really, really, really sucks. Take berries as a common example. Some are squishy, some are hard, some are sweet, some are tart, some are super juicy, some are not. Some have seeds or pits, and all of them are some combination of these factors and more. For many ND folks, consistency is a thing, and it really matters. We can mentally prepare ourselves for things that aren't exactly as we want or need them, but when every berry, even if they're the same kind, is a whole different experience, it throws our mental preparations off entirely. For neurotypical folks, you run across something that's a little off, you can push it off to the side of your plate and just keep eating. For neurodiverse folks, it might throw off our ability to eat for the rest of the day, or even longer. That's why a bunch of ND folks sometimes have really bad diets of processed foods. We have things that we call sane food or safe food, that are things that we can manage to eat when there's nothing else. A cracker is going to be the same cracker whether it's the first one out in the box or the last, barring staleness, which we can account for. And fast food's whole existence is based on the fact that you know what you're getting whether you're in Washington or Texas. So, as far as care and feeding of your indie friend goes, care for them. Offer them food, sure. But if they say no, even especially if it's a soft no, take that. They don't want to be the asshole who won't eat your food. We already feel like a jerk when we can't. Note, can't, not won't, take part in your food ritual. Please don't make us feel any worse. So, big tip number 1. If we don't accept your offer of food hospitality, that's an us thing, not a you thing. Relax. Next, let's say you've got a friend that you dearly love, but their relationship with time is, let's put it as hopeful at best. You've gotten to the point where you tell them to be somewhere an hour before you need them there because maybe they'll get it there on time. Does that sound familiar?
Yep.
Yeah.
Time's a social construct.
Sure does, Mel.
I promise, for indie folks, it's not intentional. Executive function refers to a set of mental skills that allow us to go about our day in a reasonable fashion. It's when you realize, I need to do a thing, so you get up and you go do the thing, and it's great and useful when it works. When it works. Some indie folks, you notice I keep saying some, that's because no two neurodiversities are ever the same, and no two people will experience the same things. I actually deal with the opposite of this one. I'm always early, which is a whole other thing. Anyway, what we have instead is executive dysfunction. This means that I might realize at 3 p.m. that I forgot to eat lunch. I tell myself, oh hey, I need to get something to eat. But I can't make my body get up and get food. I'm not intending to continue sitting in this chair. I'm hungry. I really want to go get food. But somewhere there's a circuit that isn't connecting between I want food and get out of chair, and it might be several hours later before I'm able to get out of the chair. By that time, I may have forgotten food. Or I might now need food and shower and bathroom and feed the cat and a whole other list of things that I've been putting off while I sat there doing nothing. Frickin' day wasted because my brain and my body just weren't communicating. Or I get sucked into starting a task like writing for a show maybe. And I look up and it's 7 hours later and I had to change over laundry and I was supposed to make a phone call before 5. Oh shit, and I haven't eaten.
And you're hungover?
And I really need to drink water.
Mostly you, Craig.
This situation has a special name. It's called time blindness. But executive dysfunction isn't just about time management either. It's about having my phone in my hand 2 seconds ago and not being able to find it now.
That happens to be always.
Right?
Glasses, phones, keys.
Whatever.
Yeah.
It's about knowing I have an appointment at 10 a.m. So I get up at 6 to make sure I've got everything ready. I set multiple alarms. And I make sure that nothing will distract me between now and when it's time to leave. So I end up sitting there, doing nothing, waiting for hours, because I am so ready. But I know that if I start doing anything, there's a chance I'm going to be late. And sometimes I'm still late because the executive dysfunction keeps me in that chair past the 3rd alarm. So big tip number 2, when your friend has a hard time getting places or loses important things, try not to get upset with them. Be a team. Work with them on coming up with solutions or strategies, like they're telling them to be somewhere early. And know that this isn't something that they're trying to do to you. This is something that their brain is doing to them. Another important thing to realize is that in our society, there's a lot, and I mean a lot, of unspoken rules. Hey, how's it going? Good, you? How often have you had that conversation? How often?
Too many times.
Right? How often are the people involved actually expecting a real answer? Not often, eh? How about, hey, what you doing? Turns out that phrase often includes an unspoken, and can I join? Or how about something less verbal, like how to stand, make eye contact, and perform a respectable handshake upon meeting somebody for a job interview, as opposed to greeting a family friend? These unspoken rules of society are ones that neurotypical folks pick up on, but neurodiverse folks often don't. We tend to prefer direct communication. We get confused and frustrated when others hint about things. We aren't good at hints. This includes, I'm done with this conversation, or I'm tired, I need to go home. Please just say it instead of expecting us to guess. Because of this, many neurodiverse folks have acquired a tool bag of when person says X, respond with Y. When encountering a situation or cue that we're unfamiliar with, we probably won't react in the expected way because our brains just don't work like that, and we don't have a preset response. We aren't good at small talk for similar reasons. We'd rather talk about something with a little meat on the bone, or our special interest, but then we always want to talk about that. Mm-hmm. Big tip number 3. If you're interacting with somebody who's ND, skip the small talk. Ask for what you need instead of hinting. Expect that they may not make the usual, I'm interested in what you're saying, body language. If they're sticking around, if they're asking questions, if they're engaging, even if they aren't looking at you, they're into it. So look, real talk here. This world was set up for neurotypical folks. The unwritten rules were created by them. Society and culture is created by and for them. Neurodiverse folks have to put a lot of effort to fit our weird trapezoidal cells into the nice round hole that everyone else seems to fit into so nicely.
Especially snakes.
Exactly.
Shut up, Craig.
Shut up, Craig.
If we don't... Shut up, Craig. If we don't, we get bullied. We get discounted. We get condescended to. Just because somebody uses a device to talk or flaps their hands doesn't mean that they can't think on par or better than somebody who uses their mouth words or can sit perfectly still. Someone whose body needs to wiggle all the time isn't paying any less attention than somebody who is eyes front, feet on floor, hands still.
I'm more scared of those people.
Right? For indie folks, it's not just hiding who you are at work or school like for neurotypicals. It's method acting, full time. This defense mechanism is known as masking. Masking and camouflaging are terms used to describe when neurodiverse individuals seek to hide or minimize their ND traits to fit in with the neurotypical world. For some of us who started masking at a young age, it's having created an entire personality based on what will cause us the least societal pain in our day-to-day lives, to the point that at 35 I didn't even know who I was under that mask, and it's fucking exhausting. I didn't intend that to get so personal, but we might as well run with it.
Yeah,
Sure, go for it.
So, this one time when I was a teenager, I was out and about in town and I ran into my mom unexpectedly. I was having a lovely day, full of perfect weather, birds singing. Her first words to me were, "Oh my goodness, are you okay? What happened?" I wasn't being specifically attentive to having a happy facial expression because I was enjoying my surroundings so much. And because I wasn't intentionally projecting happy face, my own mother couldn't tell I was happy. I'd let the mask slip. Especially since many of us have been locked in with ourselves throughout the pandemic, lots of neurodiverse folks are working on taking that mask off, at least among ourselves or in situations where we know we can be safe. If your ND friend takes the mask off, that is a huge show of trust. This might look like somebody who previously performed eye contact no longer looking at you when you talk. Or like a friend who used to sit still now pacing or bouncing or wiggling otherwise. It could be a lack of facial or vocal expression during conversations. Or they might remove some of their internal thought filters and bring you along on the ride of their train of thought through all the interesting places it goes, including many interruptions. Woohoo! Some of these behaviors may not be your favorite thing in the world. They might be distracting, unsettling, or even off-putting if you've never been exposed to them. Think of it this way. Life is distracting, upsetting, and usually off-putting for your neurodiverse friend or colleague. If they're letting you see behind the mask, they're trusting you. You have done something right to show them that you're not one of the harmful people. Big tip number 4, sit with your discomfort and revel in the honor that your friend is bestowing upon you by being themselves. It's taking a huge weight off to remove that mask. Please don't show them that their trust was unfounded and make them put it back on.
Amen.
Testify, mammal.
Preach. And finally, because this is getting long and it's Zan's shoes after all, I should mention meltdowns. They're probably the least fun part of being indie. Similar to panic attacks, but not. So, we've established that many indie folks experience the world differently from neurotypicals. Did you know that most of us can hear the whine of electricity? It's really high-pitched and distracting.
Oh,
Ah, chingo!
24/7.
My soul.
you don't have a soul.
Damn,
You
mammal.
work in television.
True.
Did you know that fluorescent lights constantly flash on and off really, really fast? Yeah, also distracting. How about the tag on your shirt at the seams? Do they itch?
I just cut that shit off.
You
Right?
just gotta shed that.
Shut up, Snake.
Everybody has that advantage, dumbass.
Not only are many of us taking in information that neurotypical folks don't pay attention to, but it's like our internal stereo, not just for sound, is turned up to 11 and we can't ever turn it off. A smell you barely notice may be absolutely the only thing I can perceive in the moment. Hair that turned loose from my head is working its way down the back of my shirt and can be my whole world until I get it off of me. Let's say you're trying to talk to me, and there's a radio on in the other room, and a bunch of kids playing a game and yelling outside, and the cat's rubbing against my ankle, and the sunlight's coming through the window so brightly, and I can smell traces of the last thing that was cooked in the kitchen. And the shirt I'm wearing is cut weird, so the fabric is stretching wrong, and my shoes are too tight. I may not actually be able to hear most of what you're saying, even though you're sitting right there. I am overloaded with sensory information, and my brain is giving every one of these things and more equal importance and focus. That's not a meltdown, that's just a conversation. So, when something other, usually unexpected element drops into all of that, that's when you get the meltdown. So, all of what I said before, plus not getting enough sleep last night. And so I'm trying to hold my own in this conversation I can barely hear, but I lose a word I'm trying to come up with. And instead of laughing it off or picking it up, another one, my system overloads. You see meltdowns more in kids than you do in adults, because most of us have learned either to withdraw when needed or to fight through it, which just means it's going to be all the worse when we're finally alone and able to melt down. Meltdowns look like getting irrationally angry for no discernible reason, pacing back and forth, losing the ability to speak. I lost it for a month once. Hyperventilating, hiding, rocking, hand flapping, crying, and more. Your neurodiverse friend already knows many things that are likely to bring on a meltdown. They may also know the things that will help calm them down. Some examples are STEM toys like bubble wrap, Play-Doh, or fidget spinners. Pressure, like a weighted blanket, a big hug, or a service dog laying on them. Or items to mitigate sensory overload, such as noise-canceling headphones or earplugs, or scented items. Meltdowns are a scary place to be. My brain is actively throwing a tantrum that I cannot immediately control. I'm acting out in ways I don't want to be. During these times, I can't necessarily parse a long sentence, and complex choices will just add to the overload. So big tip number 5. If I'm in the middle of a meltdown, be a pal. Get me somewhere quiet, dark, and or alone. Keep in mind that your friend knows this situation best. If you offer something and they say no, it is vitally important that you accept that no. Pushing anything on them, even if it's to help, can make things traumatizing and worse. I can already hear a bunch of you folks saying, but I do these things. Yeah, Pumpkin, I bet you do. Humans are a vast array of interesting brains put together in interesting ways. No one is perfectly normal, and the idea of someone who is terrifies me. That's okay. Dude, it's not all about you. Don't try to make this about you. Please get thanks. Oh, hey Zan, did you want your seat back?
Nah, you got this. Take it to the break, would you?
Sure thing, dude. Zan will be right back with Jennifer Kretchmer, so stick around.
Yeah! Hell yeah, Roach!
Is this working? I'm not sure if anyone will see this, but I figured that if there was a chance, I should give it a shot. It was, oh gosh, 10 days ago now. There's a camera here, a few lights that seem to be working, but if nothing else, there are lights, which means for the moment I'm safe. But I'm guessing they won't last long. They never do. My name is Jen Kretchmer. Before all of this, I worked in TV and in games. But that was before the sun went out.
Welcome back. I gotta say, today's guest is a quite special treat for the show, so let's just jump right in with our 3 standard questions. Who are you, what's due, and why?
Sure. Hi, I am Jen Kretchmer. I am an actor, producer, author, advocate. What else do I do? I don't know. I do a bunch of different weird stuff. My business card says Slasher of Gordian Knots, so we can go with that.
It's gotta be like, hey, let me check my own IMDb off to the side here.
Updating bios is just a chaotic disaster of a nightmare. Game designer. Did I say game designer? I might say game designer, streamer. I don't know. Slasher of Gordian Knots.
Well, like 3 things on IMDb, and it's already complicated because the system sucks.
Oh, it's a nightmare to update IMDb. Oh, it's a lot. But hey, it's really cool to have a unified database with all that information.
Absolutely. And why?
Yeah, and why? Because it's fun / interesting / important, depending on what we're talking about.
Like, which things do each of those qualify? Where do I would categorize in the whys?
I think at different points, all of them fit that each category in different ways. I think storytelling is important at its core. I think there's something vital and fundamental. I think there's a reason that we've been doing storytelling as humans from the time that we could start to communicate. It's a way to explore, it's a way to share things, it's a way to teach, it's a way to learn. So it's fun and it's important and it's interesting. So I think most of what I do is in some way deals with storytelling and also humanity. Just having, for me at least, I use stories to try and improve the way we treat each other and the way we approach one another as human beings. And the way we think about other folks out there.
It does seem like storytelling is kind of your CV in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's all sorts of different varieties of that for the most part. Yeah.
And also, it's pretty much the world's oldest profession. Well, that and nomenclator and one other that I'm sure will get censored on YouTube for.
You know what? I support folks who have professions that they have. So I'm a supporter of people in all of their professions.
Indeed. So. Especially in this economy. But on a subject that recently came up, I saw that you come from a family of artists and performers. Were you encouraged to go into the family business, or did they end up trying to steer you away from it?
It was a little bit of both. I think so. I'm a 5th generation performer. I have several generations of opera singers in my family. My grandparents met at Juilliard. My grandfather was a composer and pianist, and my grandmother was an opera singer. My dad is a TV and film director. My mom was an actor. She's now a medical social worker. So I think coming into a family of artists and growing up in a family of artists, everyone knew how hard it is to work as an artist and what that can do to you and how hard it is to live with constantly being told no. And unfortunately, with a lot of the paths that I chose, there are places where it's hard to be self-directed. Now it's a lot easier because we are in this amazing technological world of being able to create our own material. But, when I was younger and we didn't have YouTube and we didn't have camera phones and things, we we didn't have that kind of flexibility in making our own stuff in the same way. So, that was something that my parents didn't want me acting professionally when I was young. Certainly they wanted me going to school and studying academically. And then when I really was diving into the industry, they were very supportive of it, but they also really wanted me to understand what I was getting myself into, which I thought I did. And then as soon as you start getting into it, you realize you really don't. And I definitely had a lot of advantages that I think most people don't, because it was the family business. I grew up on sets, so I knew how sets worked and how kind of to behave on set. Things like that were second nature to me, which for a lot of people, the first time they go on set is when they book a job. And so there's this steep learning curve. So those were certainly advantages that I had. But, my parents knew how hard it was and certainly wanted me to recognize that I had other options if it turned out not to be the thing I wanted to continue pursuing. And I came into the industry at a really terrible time. I came in right around the time of the writer's strike, and I had just gotten my SAG card when the writer's strike happened, and it was tough. So yeah.
You know how you
It's
got
a
this
weird- it's a
license
weird-
that you can work on all these different productions? We're not doing that right now. So
Yeah, it was tough. It was disheartening. Like I felt like I had finally gotten some momentum going, and then everything shut down. But it ended up leading me to production, and I learned so much doing production, and I really enjoyed learning how to create pieces. And now I get to come at things as a producer and as a writer and sort of and as a performer, and use all of those skill sets in one, which is really phenomenal. And then streaming tabletop became a thing, which is unreal, because you never think that the thing that you're getting together secretly with friends and as a 18-year-old to go play in your parents' basement and not telling anybody what you're doing that weekend would turn into a career, and I'm very lucky that has.
and it's odd, like you came into the industry at exactly the time of the writer's strike, and I started this show pretty much exactly as the pandemic started. So
It's really interesting how much creativity. I certainly believe that limitations can, that sort of pressure can create extraordinary art, and that so much creativity comes out of having some boundaries on it.
you get
Whether that's a budget or whether that's having to film from home,
you get a very creative mindset when your every third sentence is, okay, new plan.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You have to think about things in a completely different way. And so it's a pretty extraordinary thing this time we're living in. And it's phenomenal to see what people have done with that.
It's crazy how the industry has kind of flipped, where previously it was nearly impossible to get your own independent productions going up and get them out there in a significant manner. But these days, it's kind of the only option.
Yeah. Well, and also the advent of things like Twitch, where it really has created a space where people can come and do what they want to do, and that becomes a viable pathway to sharing your work and having people put eyes on it. It's a pretty neat thing. This, it's a double-edged sword, but having this equity of content distribution.
So back to previous subject, because this show is really just oops all tangents when it comes to interviews.
I'm here for it. I'm all about that.
like I had said previously before we started, these interviews don't intentionally go beyond an hour, but it sometimes just ends up that way. So, did you go to school specifically for performance?
Yes and no. So I started training as an actor professionally when I was 12 or 13, and I went to intensive arts programs all throughout my teenage years, and continued in acting classes and things. And when I went to college, I initially went to Northwestern and I had 4 majors at the time, like you do.
Damn, I'm slacking on.
Which then I dropped 1 and I just went to 3. But I was a theater major. I just went to 3, like you do. I was still in the early years at that point. I didn't really have to settle down on choices yet, but I was at
you only got 3 majors.
I was chronically underachieving at that point. Then when I transferred, I ended up having a full-time job and doing all sorts of other things. So, go figure. But no, I was a theater major and I was studying literature. And at the time I was also looking at sociology and classics. But eventually I was leaning more towards sociology. So all really practical degrees.
I'm
my parents were thrilled.
Some of my writers get majored in sociology as well. You wouldn't believe how much sarcastic comedy that can get you.
You know what? I really do think that learning about anything informs everything we do. So I really despise the idea that there are certain paths of exploration and study that have no value. We live in a world where everything has connection to other things. There's nothing that exists in isolation in this world. So, your experiences in education may lead you to how you approach writing a play. Your experiences in physics may change how you create a painting. It's all, art tries to capture the human experience, right? And the way we perceive the world. And so I think that anything we do has value added to that. And that's why when people are like, no, I just want to focus on this one thing forever. I just want to focus on my art. You're going, but your art doesn't exist in a vacuum. You have to participate in the world. Yeah. So I started with that. And then when I transferred to Cal, I ended up graduating from UC Berkeley. I ended up dropping the theater major because my credits didn't transfer, and just forgetting about the sociology major because I was doing other stuff. So as a lit major, I did disability studies as my minor, but I was 1 class short of the actual official minor because they didn't offer it. They only offered it once after I transferred, and I didn't even know the minor existed at that point. And then I did plays. I did the main stage plays. So I got to do 3 Sisters and a few other things without actually being a theater major. So I got to continue that process, but was studying literature and disability studies mostly.
Did you ever do any Shakespeare by any chance?
Oh yes, I actually have a Shakespeare tattoo. I'm a huge Shakespeare nerd. Shakespeare was one of my specialties in lit. All so right. Yeah.
Favorite play?
I mean, you have to say Hamlet, right? That's kind of the law if you're an English major.
Hamlet.
I mean, but I also I love Twelfth Night. I think it's a really phenomenal play. I mean, you're asking me to pick children here. My tattoo is from Midsummer, but it's I love all of them for different reasons.
We need to know about the tattoo because he was in Midsummer.
Yeah,
he was Nick
I played Nick Bottom.
Oh, nice. I was in Midsummer as well. I did. It was my first professional theater job actually after college. I was there's an amazing theater in LA called the Willier Theatricum Botanicum, which is this outdoor amphitheater, and it's been there forever. And it's this amazing place that in the summer they do Midsummer outside, coming out of the hills. It's just fantastic. So at Northwestern, I was part of a Shakespeare company called Lovers and Madmen. And
awesome.
Yeah, they're amazing. It's an amazing group of people. And I always loved the quote, even though the language is a little stigmatizing. I really love the quote, "The lunatic, the lover, and the poet of imagination all compact." So yeah.
I feel like Lovers and Madmen could Honestly,
which is it's the lovers and madmen have such seething brains. It's that the whole quote comes together. Sorry, I didn't tie it all together, but the whole quote includes the phrase lovers and madmen, but I don't have that part on the tattoo, but it has meaning for me. And also it means that Shakespeare's always got my back because it's like right between my shoulder blades. So
so it's partially for love of the medium and all the literature around it, and partially because of the pun.
Yeah, and a lot of the meaning of it, I really love the idea that art and the things that we consider wild and strange and passion all come from the same place. That it's this deep-rooted need and fire and humanity, and I love that idea of it all being rooted in the same core element.
Inspiration spurred from love and madness, which I think also is the synopsis for Midsummer Night's Dream. Because seriously, I've looked at, like, you can look at a lot of other Shakespeare plays, like, this one is about hubris, this one is about searching for knowledge that you shouldn't search for. Midsummer, I think the moral is just don't go into the forest and don't interact with the Fae, or else you are going to have a weird day.
Yeah, or do, and you're gonna have a weird day, because I think because you get the story out of it, and there, I mean, certainly there were, to look at Midsummer through a modern lens, there's a lot to say about it, but also, I love threads that go through mythology and folk tales and fairy tales, and I love the idea of the Maenads in Greek, the Bacchae, and the idea of needing this liminal place where you go to figure things out. Something that is outside of the everyday, something that is outside of the regular, slog, that becomes this place outside where you find yourself. And to me, that's a lot of that is what that play is about. And also just Puck is like the greatest character ever. So
or at the end
fun.
of the play, he's just like, okay, if you didn't like it, just say it was a dream.
If we got us have offended, think that this, and all is meant to, yep. I love that whole speech.
The original speech of, be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you liked the video, and if you didn't, fuck off.
Basically, yeah. And then it's fun to kind of draw a line between that and like Prospero's final speech. And
hell yeah.
No, I can go on Shakespeare for forever. I am a huge Shakespeare nerd.
I particularly love Tempest, mostly because I ended up playing Caliban with full makeup and everything, and somehow I ended up sympathetic. I don't know how, I don't know why. And
because
then
he's a horrifically abused character who's framed as just continually mistreated. So you have an empathy for him, even though he is, he only internalizes what people say about him. And would he be that in any other place?
Yeah.
That's deep.
Yep.
Excuse me while I would go re-examine some life choices. Stick around, we'll be right back. I don't know the next social crisis at the moment. Bye. All right, well, moving from the subject of the Fae and the fantastical, I read in one of your bios that you're also a magician. What got you started?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I was a magician for 5 years. I'm not really in practice anymore, but when I was younger, I worked as a professional magician. I was a demonstrator at Universal Studios City Walk. There was a magic shop up there, and I was a demonstrator. So, I was 16 wearing a full tux and tails to work. And I was a member of the Magic Castles Junior program, which is an incredible program. It took me 3 years to get in. It was a lot of auditioning.
Wow.
But they take people because you're not allowed into the club until you're 21. But if you're from the time you're 12, you're allowed to start auditioning. And when I joined, I think there were 3 women in the program and 60 guys. So yeah, it was a really interesting experience. And they had amazing mentorship, and a bunch of the folks I was in the program with are now, professional magicians working, doing all sorts of cool stuff. So it's been really neat to see that journey for people. But I love the artistry of magic. I think there's something really beautiful and fascinating about it.
Did you stick to close-up magic or like on stage?
I primarily did stage magic because I was very small. I didn't hit my growth spurt until high school. And so when I started doing magic, I was, 11 or 12, I think. And so I had very small hands. I couldn't palm cards. I couldn't, I just was too small to actually do any manipulation stuff with standard size equipment. So I primarily did stage and parlor, but I loved close-up, and I was always really envious of the folks who could master close-up stuff. Yeah.
Like, but you're probably at least somewhat good at close-up, because like, wait, oh, hey, something behind my ear. Oh, cool, my class rank. How'd you steal that from within Zoom?
Magic. Yeah, magic. Also, magic is the home of dad jokes. I mean, I'm convinced dad jokes were born out of magic circles.
The etymology of dad jokes.
But I really loved like the very classic style of magic. I really always loved that, 1800s. I was entranced by the 1800s style era, where it was, the conjurer kind of era, where you would go on stage and it was very formal. But also modern magic still has those historical traditional trappings of you still wear a tux, and there are practical considerations for why, but there are also just I sort of loved that tie to this bygone era. I thought there was something really neat about that. But it was not, it wasn't designed to be able to wear a sleeveless dress. They didn't make stuff. There were only a handful of non-guys working professionally who weren't working as assistants. So it was a tough thing to look at and anticipate a professional future in at that point, at that age too, as someone other than a guy.
Well, if nothing else, if you're up for that sort of thing in a career, at least you'll look fantastic. Like
Lots
the presentation
changed.
Like the presentation seems to be a big factor in it.
Yeah, it really is. And just I love performing in any venue, in any style. Those skills translate place to place, and I was doing a lot of magic at theater camp. Like it's kind of a lot of it's all from the same core places, and magic is choreography, is dance, is you can just sort of take that to its logical extension. But it's really heartening to see that magic has changed a lot in the last few years. It's really exciting. And by the time I left the program, the balance of that program had changed pretty substantially. But yeah, it's really interesting.
And
I really do. I love watching magicians. I think it's such an incredibly challenging art form to be good at.
Then you got the most incredible concept in magic, where like things that would be just it's a simple trick here, where it's like, I will conjure this entire thing out of thin air. Now we have 3D printers, so it's not that special.
Yeah, well, you learn so much from studying the ideas behind this direction, and all of the sort of mentalism stuff that was popular. The way those things were applied is so interesting. And then to kind of a lot of the people who I was in the program with now work for companies like Disney, doing Imagineering stuff, because the types of things you have to learn how to make and build and design become, that's what those kinds of companies now need.
Not only do you have to make it magical, you also have to hide the little tricks off to the side.
Mm-hmm. how do you make sure that nobody hears this thing happen, or how do you make sure that someone's looking over here while this thing over here is happening? It's a fascinating psychological study. Yeah, it's a weird job to have, but it was a ton of fun when I got to be a demonstrator. I loved it. It was a great gig, and it was just so interesting to get to go up there and meet all sorts of people and show off, and yeah, it was a blast.
Right. So we've talked about your theater background. Do you prefer stage or screen performance?
They're very different. I think I'm a big fan of having the story fit the medium. So some things are right for stage. Some things work really well on the screen. Some things are made for, designed for TV. If you have something where you really want to have a long time to dig into characters and really unpack and untangle someone, if you want to have someone think someone is something and then have a really long process of untangling that and growth to something else, TV is your medium for that kind of story. If you want something that's a huge spectacle, you're looking at film. And theater can be a number of different things, but they all have their purposes. So it's all really different, and the process of making them is so different.
Going back to Shakespeare, you can definitely see how things can go wrong when you try to translate from one medium to another, such as that one Romeo and Juliet movie.
Well, and I love that. I think that's such a really. I think it's one of the more brilliant adaptations, because it was one of the first times those characters had been played by people who were, other than Zeffirelli. It was one of the first times the characters were played by people the appropriate age, and I think they really captured the spirit of each of those characters so precisely, with the performances and with the design. I mean, yes, it's very frenetic, and it's Baz Luhrmann doing what Baz Luhrmann does, but I rewatched it recently because I actually played Juliet last year, and which weird quarantine things, speaking of making art in quarantine, and did not think I would be playing her at this point in my life, but it was really, what was weird was watching it, and for the first time, I was of an age when that was like Leonardo DiCaprio, Claire Danes, they're so hot. They're like, I was of the age where that was the aspirational film. But this was the first time I watched it, and I'm like, those are children. They are making very bad decisions, and an adult needs to interfere and step in and stop this.
What was it? A 13-year-old and a 16-year-old have a 3-day
Juliet is 14.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And what, 10 people die or something? It's bad.
Ridiculous number. Yeah, it's not a good time for anyone in that play. Rosalind gets away okay. She got out while the getting was good. Sure. No, it's but I loved the way that Mercutio is just, it's iconic. That Queen Mab speech is just phenomenal. So yeah, I have a really soft spot in my heart for that, because I hadn't ever heard the language performed in a conversational way at that point in my life, and to hear it that way and to understand it in that way was remarkable. It was like, I thought they were adding words when he's calling him cuz and things like that. I thought they were adding modern slang. And no, absolutely not. It's in the script. But it never occurred to me that could exist in that play in that way.
And then you got Paul Rudd in the movie, because how can you go wrong with Paul Rudd?
You can never go wrong with Paul Rudd. You need an I win button for your movie, just put Paul Rudd in.
Toss him in as like at least a secondary character, and you're golden.
Solid.
If nothing else, people are going to rewatch your movie. Like, they're gonna rewatch your movie at the very least in the same way that people watch Sleeping Beauty just to get to the Maleficent parts. Like, you know what we're here
She's
for.
like, absolutely.
I'm really enjoying watch. I mean, it's really interesting to see Disney go full tilt into the villains right now, and to see why the villains were so formative for everyone. I remember as a kid, like looking at the villains and going, why did they always get the good teeth? Like the heroes get just white. It's just a band of white across the mouth. And the villains had defined teeth. And as a kid, I was like, why is that? And then the more I thought about it, I'm like, that's because the villains have more defined characters. More to do, and they have more interesting motivations than the heroes who just sort of showed up. And so I think it's really interesting to see the villains being foregrounded and given all of this, you know, extensive characterization. But I also wonder what that says about our society, that we give more energy to the villains than we do to the heroes.
Yeah. But then in some cases,
storytelling.
Then in some cases, like with Maleficent, like you got the original movie, and Maleficent herself in Sleeping Beauty, lovely, like absolutely badass, kicking ass, just like busting in, like, excuse the hell out of me.
Well, and also I think it's important to note that a lot of the time, those were the empowered women we would get in fairy tales, were the villains. They were the ones who were independent. They were the ones who didn't need to find a prince to make their choices, who had their own castles, you know. And I think for a lot of us, you know, that's something we connected to wanting. I mean, there are dissertations, many dissertations that can and probably have been written about this, but yeah, you get someone like Maleficent strolling in and taking command and saying, hey, I know what I'm doing, I know what I want, and all of you, you know, screw you.
And never underestimate the power of body language.
Never underestimate the power of body language. Little Mermaid was my movie. That was, you know, everyone has their Disney movie, and that was mine. So yes, Ursula.
And on the subject of female empowerment in Disney, have you gotten sucked into the cult of Encanto yet?
I loved Encanto.
Yes,
it's Encanto.
We have watched it in my household at least 7 times already.
Oh, it's so good.
And the music lives
so
rent-free in our heads.
It's phenomenal. It's such a phenomenal story, and I love that we're getting. Speaking of villains, I mean, you're finally getting a complex villain. You're not getting mustache twirling, like I am evil for the sake of being evil.
Even though that is pretty fun a lot of the time.
It's fun, but it's only fun for a minute. You know, once you start actually trying to unpack that, there's nothing behind it. And when you start getting to these sort of morally complex storylines, like, oh, it's so good. And I love that, you know, Latinx kids are going to have people like them on screen, and Afro Latinx kids are having people like them on screen. Like it's so wonderful to see that other kids are going to get the experience that I had of Disney movies. That makes me really, really happy, because everybody deserves to have themselves in a Disney movie. You know, everyone should have themselves as the hero as a kid.
Yeah. It seems like people of each generation can identify with different characters in Encanto. Like, I noticed that a lot of the major millennial population identify with Luisa's song. And then a lot of Gen X, or at least my parents, identify with Bruno. There's like,
we don't talk about Bruno.
Get a bad rap. No. We don't talk about Bruno. No. But and we spend the rest of this interview just doing the Encanto soundtrack.
No, but I love, I mean, I guess most modern fairy tales are about someone who doesn't feel like they fit in. You know, someone who feels like they're an outsider in their own family or in their own community, who feels isolated or like they're the weird one. And Encanto is that being made literal. And I love, you know, also that magical realism is such an important part of Latino American stories and folklore. You know, you look at Lorca, or you look at Marquez, and that's such a part of the stories of Latin American literature. And so to see it just on screen to that degree. It's so beautiful to me and so wonderful. And also the music is awesome and the story's great. And
then you got the whole subsection of the story where it's like feeling like an outsider, and then discovering that those who are actually special and in the in-group all
feel
have
like outsiders.
Serious insecurities.
Yep.
Like, wait, did you just understand me?
Yeah, it's really, really beautiful.
But above everything else, we don't talk about Bruno.
We don't talk about Bruno. No, absolutely not.
So circling back to, well, like 3 non sequiturs past, what has been your favorite stage versus screen role?
I mean, on stage, it's a tough one. I think the most fun I've ever had on stage was playing Kate in Taming of the Shrew. Because
oh, that's amazing.
I mean, it's just, you get to go in and just throw Petruchio across the stage and you beat each other up for hours, and it's so much fun.
About to turn Shakespeare into a fighting game.
Yeah, I just, and the language is so interesting, and that play is so interesting. And I actually, when I was in college, which was after I had played the role, I played the role my senior year of high school. In college, I sat down with my professor who had written the intro to the Norton Shakespeare, and we talked about that play and why we feel the way we do about whether or not Kate actually changes. And we both agreed on it and had very similar logic behind it. And so first of all, I felt really like, I interpreted the material correctly. But also just, it really changes the play, because that play can be seen as a really hot mess for a lot of people, and justifiably so. It's this idea of women being subservient and having to do everything their husband wishes and all of that. But to me, they really do reach a great. They both know that it's a game. And whatever they choose to do, it's a game. And if one decides to go off, it's a game. And they've both agreed to play that game by the end.
Yeah. And then they sort of teaming up at the end to play that game on other people. It's like, we're both good at this.
Well, and it hinges, so here's me getting nitpicky with the specifics of Shakespeare, but to me, it hinges on the word honest. She says, oh gosh, now I've got to remember. I know it's to his honest will. Is it an obedient to his honest will? It's something like that. I'm blanking on the exact text of it. It's in the middle of the monologue. But everything hinges on that honest will. He's got to be, the working together is contingent on treating each other with respect. And so that to me is a big piece of it. And also the scene with it's the sun, it's the moon, that fight after he, don't get me wrong, it's never okay that he's that abusive. Like, she should be out of there. Within the context of Elizabethan society, she doesn't have a choice. But, he's literally torturing her. He's denying her food. He's keeping her, it's false imprisonment. That part is not cool. And I do not support this as a way to come to an impasse with your partner. But I do think that the story is a journey of those two people deciding that they're going to be a team. But that if one steps a toe out of line, it's on. It's
if you take the view that Kate learned how to play along as opposed to being broken by Petruchio, it's kind of an endorsement of seizing female power even in the harshest of conditions.
Yeah, I think it's really an interesting process. It's someone who was refusing to even consider that there might be someone who she could connect with on a level where that's a fun thing to do. And it's her arc is her finding that piece, to me, is that her realizing that this is a person who we're equally matched. And don't get me wrong, she's also pretty, in a lot of ways, these are really terrible people, but also they're really fun people to play. And the arc of the play is a classic story at its core. if you can take out the abuse, because she's also terrible to Bianca. I mean, she's tying her up, you know, not cool, but where they're, you know, what the story is doing. I think 10 Things I Hate About You was a fantastic adaptation.
Oh, so good.
It's a brilliant adaptation, and you know, is able to separate that out and captures that really well, that there's, you know, a woman who is smart and just powerful and wants to do her own thing and is not permitted to do that by the confines of her situation. And meeting a guy who is looking for that same type of thing. He is also bound by the confines of his situation. So, you know, it's the heart of it is a classic story of it's the misfit again. It's someone who doesn't quite belong where they are, and you find a person who you can connect with, and what happens next.
Well, it's very wise.
Yeah, again, you dig into Shakespeare, and there's stuff that through a modern lens is super problematic, but in the time was what you used to entertain the groundlings. It's all dirty jokes. I mean, that's arguably the filthiest show out there.
Back to, I think, the best phrase that comes out of this interview. Describing any Shakespeare play could really just be in the quote of, overall, these are actually really horrible people. I feel like you can just sum up the filmography, scriptology with, these are kind of horrible people.
Yeah, people coming out of conflict. I mean, yeah, I don't know. But I love Shakespeare. And if you haven't seen Slings and Arrows, which is a Canadian TV show,
Paul Gross.
It was, Rachel McAdams.
Yeah. Well, and
Sarah
Paul
Polley.
Gross is great on that. Was the one where he was a Mountie? I can't remember.
Due North?
Due North. Yeah, that was great. It was a great show.
Yeah, Slings and Arrows is my favorite TV show, I think.
Oh,
it's just, it's phenomenal. And it's some of the best Shakespeare you'll ever see too, which just, it's a dream come true. Mark McKinney, they're so brilliant. So yeah, hilarious stuff about, and as a person who does theater, it's very inside baseball, which is also really fun.
And merrily we get off track.
Yes, always. And screen roll, I don't know, because that's a little trickier. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I mean, a lot of the stuff I'm doing now is the tabletop stuff and doing streaming games and things. And I think there's a lot in there that I really love, because there is this unpredictability to what's happening, and playing these really wild characters that go on these incredible journeys. And I really, that's been some of my favorite stuff I've gotten to do in recent memory. So
the definition of screen roll has definitely expanded over the past few years.
100%, yeah.
And we'll definitely get to tabletop gaming in a little bit. Don't worry about that. I read about your involvement with the Speakeasy Society. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so the Speakeasy Society is a Los Angeles immersive experience company. They do, the first thing I saw them do was something called the Kansas Collection. I saw the first chapter and then went on to see all of the different chapters of it, but it was an immersive adaptation of the later books of the Oz series by Alfred Baum. So you would go in and you would join a faction, and you would follow the story of what was happening in Oz, but you were part of it. And it was a really remarkable thing. And I was collaborating with them. After I saw the first show, I had something else I was working on, and I talked to them about collaborating, and we started working together on that. But I also started, loud motorcycles on the street. I started working
I got
with them.
Track racing pickup trucks outside my house all the damn time.
Yeah. It's tough when you're trying to film from home and you have loud street noise, but that's welcome to 2021, 22.
Welcome to the internet.
Yeah. But I ended up designing puzzles for them for the interstitials, because it was a little while between each of the different chapters. So in the interstitials, you could be communicating with one of the commanders, and we would give you puzzles to solve or codes to crack. that would send you to a Goodreads bookshelf, and then there would be a code embedded in the books that we chose for that. And if you could crack that, you would get a link to a website which would give you a code phrase to say at the next chapter. And it was really, really neat. And so they did the full series, and it was phenomenal. I'm really interested in immersive storytelling, in interactive storytelling. I think what they did with Dispatches from Elsewhere was really interesting. I'm really curious to see what happens with television. Unfortunately, I think the pandemic has rerouted us a little bit from where things were going with interactive. But I think it's a really fascinating type of storytelling and a really interesting way to engage an audience.
Yeah. I'd actually done something rather similar back in high school. I had done a thing over at there's a place nearby my town called Pioneer Farms. It's kind of like a historical preservation style thing for old houses from the 1800s.
Like a colonial Williamsburg kind of.
Yes.
Except Texas homes.
Yeah. So yeah, more
Oh,
country
wow.
stuff. And haunted as all hell. But for one of the holiday seasons, they did a sort of interactive walking along theater play of A Christmas Carol.
Oh, cool. Speakeasy also does one. They call it Ebenezer, and it's won a bunch of awards.
That's what I
and we
did.
did it online. Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's
Or
awesome.
it might have been called Ebenezer's Journey or something like that.
Journey. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, theirs is called Ebenezer, and they've won a bunch of awards for it. It's really, really cool.
Dang. If they ever need any extras for young Ebenezer, I've already got the script.
You're too old.
It's awesome. I mean, I think. Oh, I'm sorry.
I say he's too old to be young Ebenezer now.
Shush.
It's a fascinating. There's something so amazing, and I think this ties back to Shakespeare too. That idea of engaging with an audience directly. That's part of what makes live theater so great, but also it's just that piece of storytelling that I think people are starting to crave. I think it's part of why tabletop has had a resurgence, is because so often we are sort of tethered to our devices and we don't interact directly with people. And this was true pre-pandemic. This isn't even starting to think about, how we interact over screens, but I think the things that sort of force us to be present in the moment and directly connect with other humans is a really, it's something that we are sort of finding almost novel now. It's an experience that we're sort of seeking out as entertainment now in a way that we haven't before, and yet we always have, if that makes any sense.
It's always interesting how you can interact. If you can interact more directly with audiences, you can get them to see things in ways you never even thought before. Like for us over at Pioneer Farms, it was another case of somehow making a villain sympathetic. Like we played the whole scene where Scrooge's girlfriend left him because he was so entrenched in his work, and then somehow people started getting mad at the girlfriend. Like as I was playing it, I was like,
yeah,
this keeps happening to me.
Yeah, there's an interesting question. Again, it goes back to that, like, if you make your villain your protagonist, are you in some ways forgiving or giving permission to them to behave poorly, and condoning it because you're saying this is the person who gets centered in the stories? And I think who you center in stories is a really important question, because the stories you choose to tell says a lot about whose stories you think are of value and who is of worth to have their stories told, and that then from there people make judgments. I mean, this is the way that fiction informs our reality and reality informs our fiction, and it becomes this feedback loop. So it's a really interesting one, because does that make people think, oh, if I behave badly, that's something that can be condoned, and that could be something that makes me, in some ways, a hero?
It seems like the closer you can get the audience to that action, like especially in cases like the Speakeasy Society, where they're actually right there and sometimes interacting with the characters, that gets them to think a lot harder about who they're dealing with.
Yeah, and Christmas Carol is a really interesting text to begin with. I think the Stephen Knight version that came out in 2019 is a really really fascinating take on it, because it really doesn't absolve Scrooge of his behavior. Like, he recognizes that forgiveness is not just something you can stroll on in and get for one good deed, that it's something that is an ongoing process that has to be earned. And, you know, it's a much darker telling of that story. But I thought it was a fascinating take on it. I love it when people take old stories and do something with them that you go, oh, wow, I never even considered that possibility. Like, that's a cool thing. I mean, Gregory Maguire did it with Wicked, which the Gregory Maguire book, there's almost no identifiable comparison with what the musical is, even though it's based on the book. They're completely different stories in a lot of ways. But all of his books do that. They take different fairy tales and they twist them and fracture them and rebuild them in fascinating ways.
And then you have things that are just essentially direct script adaptations, like the Shakespeare thing, or as I'm told, Muppets Christmas Carol, which I've been told is really good, but I still
It's fantastic. Oh, it's so good.
I got a little ways into it, and honestly, what I saw with it was like, it's kind of seamless, the interaction between the humans and the Muppets. It's like, oh wow, that puppet is a really good actor.
It's so good.
Like that raccoon in Guardians was really good.
Yeah, that raccoon in Guardians of the Galaxy was a really good actor. Like, wonder how many IMDb credits he's got.
Just a couple.
He works on mostly independent films. Yeah.
Small indies.
Shoestring budgets. Working out of the dumpster. So back on to something a bit more simplified than just, you know, all the tangents of existentialism that we've gone off on this. So you are an out and proud self-described nerd. Where does your love of all things nerdy come from?
I have no clue. I've always loved books. I've loved fantasy stories. I mean, maybe it's the books that had the most influence on me when I was young. I mean, the three books that I think have been the most formative for me were The Phantom Tollbooth, Matilda, and A Wrinkle in Time. And something about that trio just deeply informed who I am and what kind of stories I'm interested in and what I like in writing. You know, the wordplay of The Phantom Tollbooth and the playfulness of it and the way that it's taking everyday things and making you reconsider them. That absolutely comes through to me in everything I do. You know, and Matilda and Meg Murphy were like, Meg Murray were two of the characters. I can't believe I said that wrong, but it's been a long day and I'm tired and I'm owning it. Meg Murray and Matilda are two characters where for the first time, I sort of saw myself in them, because so often you didn't see characters who weren't guys who were smart, who were academic, who didn't necessarily fit in, who weren't, you know, the perfect little girl with bows in their hair. And, you know, Meg would, you know, could recite physics just off the top of her head, and Matilda was obviously like able to move stuff with her mind because she was so bored with the stuff that she was learning. And, you know, I was the kid who in second grade, I had read all of the advanced reading books, so they put me in the slower reading group because I had already read the other books, and the only book I hadn't read was the beginning book.
That doesn't seem fair at all.
Yeah, but that's what they knew what to do with me at the time. So that was my kind of experience. So those were absolutely characters I connected to. You know, luckily I didn't have the traumatic childhood experiences that they both were dealing with at that age. But yeah, they were characters who were really important to me, and stories that I thought were really fantastic, literally and figuratively.
And if only the mindset actually did come with telekinesis as a bonus.
Yeah, but it went away as soon as she got challenged by stuff. So,
Yeah.
ish, depending on which read you're doing. And then it got a Tim Minchin musical, so that was exciting.
That is very
Music
cool.
is-
Tim Minchin's dope.
Tim Minchin's amazing.
Like rock and
And
roll
music
nerd
in that
was
show
the
is
best.
yeah. I mean, Tim Minchin's does so much incredible stuff, and the music for Matilda is phenomenal. And the show is incredible too.
I mean, you got
He just
musical
does
comedians.
really interesting things harmonically, and I love his stuff.
Then you got musical comedians like Bo Burnham, just like, yeah, you hear about these all the time. But have you heard the works of the rock and roll nerd over here?
Yeah, musical comedians in the true sense of the comedians who use music. It's such a unique set of talents required to be good at it, and the way Tim Minchin can channel real anger into his work and really just taking on ideas and trying to work through them is fascinating to me. But he also has these incredibly beautiful pieces that are just evocative and emotional and gorgeous. I mean, White Wine in the Sun is just stunning. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Tim Minchin, so I thought he was a great fit for Matilda for an adaptation.
And then out of all musical comedy, Weird Al stands alone.
Yes, this is true.
Another small tone shift. How did you get started in gaming?
I got started in gaming. When I was 14 at camp, a bunch of my actor friends were playing D&D, and my brother, who was younger than I am, was into it. And we got home and he said, "Do you want to learn?" And I said, "Yeah." And he started to teach me and I went, "No, not right now." And I just couldn't engage with it.
Wait, which edition was it?
Second edition.
Oh.
Second edition, but that's actually the first edition I learned to play. So fast forward 3 years, and in high school, I was a high school senior, and a bunch of my actor friends were getting together, and one of them had played and DM'd before and said, "Hey, I'll run a campaign for you." And everyone went, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, my brother has books." And I went and I said to my brother, "Could I borrow your books?" And he said, "Yes." And I never gave them back, and they are sitting on the bookshelf right next to me. And now I write for Dungeons and Dragons. So
what's the statute of limitations on D&D book theft?
he doesn't play anymore, so I get to keep them.
Snooze, you lose.
Works in a case of civil law.
I mean, if he really, really wanted them back, I might consider it, but I would probably try and buy them off of him if he was being really difficult. But he doesn't live in this country anymore either, so. Yeah, my brother lives in Sweden.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
He's over there with all the rest of the speedrunners.
Yeah, he's lived in Paris and in Brussels and in Ireland and now in Stockholm. So he's lived all over Europe.
All right.
I think Sweden's going to be the place they stay for a while. He just had a baby, so.
Oh,
yeah.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited. I'm very proud to have a little nibbling to be an aunt. It's really exciting.
All right. Now, I know that this is opening a huge can of worms right here, but tell me about your D&D character.
Which one? I got asked earlier today how many characters I have, and I really thought about it. It was like well over 100. So the character I've played, well, my favorite, I don't know, that's you want to talk about picking children. Oh gosh. I'm gonna go with I'm gonna talk, I guess, about my character who I played for the last 3 years, who's the one who's in the video game and things like that. Because yeah, she's just the most present in my brain at the moment. Though I'm currently playing a new one and building another one that's going to be coming out soon. That's all I can say. Welcome to NDA land.
Once again, nobody watches the show, so you might be able to slip a little bit in there.
No, I can't. I wish I could.
Don't worry,
I wish I could. And also there's not. I can't. She's still being. I'm gonna leave it at they're still being built because I'm not sure on gender. I'm still figuring a few things out, but.
All right, we got one clue. Let's get on this.
The clue is I haven't locked in on anything yet. That's a good clue. No.
Hey, a lot of YouTube channels.
We've
do
already
more
said
with
that
less.
Demiplane, which is where I do a show that we're doing currently in an 8-week Strixhaven campaign, and when that is over, we're about to start a new big campaign. So that's I'm working on a character for the big campaign. But the last big campaign, my character's name was Alindra. She was an elf diviner wizard. She was a moon elf diviner wizard, with a little bit of cleric. She had a level of cleric as well. So she was a cleric of Akma. She was the rest of her levels were in diviner. She had a pet owl familiar named Griff. And Griff was the judgiest of owls. It was all about the eyebrows. Every time I had to give an art note about Griff for either for character art or for the game, it was make the eyebrows more judgy. And it just delights me. My favorite Griff, though, is we did a little side arc with some of the characters, and we got put into formal wear at one point. And so I had Griff with a monocle and a top hat looking just deeply unhappy, and it makes me so delighted. Yeah, and Alindra had a whole bunch of names because she was an anthropologist. So everywhere she went and was given a name, she had to keep the name and add it to the list. So she had something like 18 names. And she was a little bit of a stick in the mud sometimes. She was a little bit snooty. She was kind of everyone's mom in a lot of ways, just like grabbing people by the collar going, no, we're not going to run into combat right now. And she was the child of a trickster and they were both kind of trickster-y, a bit, an artificer, but she was kind of, they were like, think of Gomez and Morticia Adams and then throw in a bunch of Loki, and that was Alindra's parents. So yeah.
Now I just want to see a crossover of Adam's family and Loki.
Oh, you can watch it. She was with her parents for a fair amount of one of the campaigns. They were characters.
Smith, and he was writing Loki, so
Yeah, maybe we can get a crossover storyline going.
I mean, look, Loki has a daughter in mythology. It's a whole thing. Yeah, it's a whole adventure with Loki's daughter. But yeah, she's really special to me, and you know, I loved playing her. Her whole thing was, I have foreseen this, and she had a snobby British accent, and yeah, she was a blast.
The Alpha Legion style of just as planned.
Yeah, you can play her in Idle Champions if you want to see more about her and kind of get a sense of who she is. You could take a look at her in Idle Champions of the Forgotten Realms, which is a video game on basically every platform in existence. It's an idle clicker, and you can actually get our whole party of characters from that show as characters.
Cool.
Not sponsored, gentlemen. Well, if you're willing to toss that as sponsorship, good too.
We are not at that level yet.
Idle Champions is great. It's a lot of fun, and they do quality stuff, and it's an official D&D game, so the lore in the game is official D&D lore. It's a really cool game. I played it before I ever was in it, which was really exciting to be part of that universe. But no, I love Alindra. But I've played so much D&D that I feel like I've played almost every combination of race, class, background you can put out there.
Have you played a rogue wizard halfling with a drunken snake familiar?
Drunken Snake Familiar? I don't think Drunken Snake Familiar, but I have played a rogue wizard halfling.
Well, then,
I mean, when you look back at older D&D, to be a bard, you had to go rogue, wizard, and fighter. You had to take all three classes.
Yeah.
And you had to earn them, and they all had different experience requirements, and you had to roll ridiculously high stats in order to even access wizard. So like, yeah, it was not an easy achievement. Bards used to be like this high tier achievement if you could be a bard.
Yeah. And now they're just used for a lot of horny bard memes.
This is true. I love bards though. They're really fun to play. They're super versatile. Like druids, they can be Swiss Army knives for your party. They can do all sorts of cool stuff. And then also, you know, if you so choose to play the stereotype, go seduce the tavern wench or gentleman or, you know, whoever. Or the tavern, depends on your game. The tavern itself.
It's whoever or whatever. It's like, if you have animate object, the possibilities are endless.
All your game. Play it the way you want to play it. I do not speak for Dungeons and Dragons officially.
And if they did have an opinion on this, I don't think they'd release it. And from fun fantasy to sometimes harsh reality, you're a heavily committed advocate for people with disabilities. How did you come to be involved with that?
So as I mentioned, I minored in disability studies, but was one class short of the official minor because, you know, disclaimer. I had been working with all sorts of disabled folks prior to that too, from the time I was younger, but I didn't really know that I was actually part of that community until I was an adult. So I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which means that it's a genetic condition that means my body makes wonky collagen. So it's a connective tissue disorder. All of my joints are pretty loose and unstable, so they dislocate a lot. That started happening when I was a little kid, but nobody realized that this was what was going on until I was much older. It took a lot of years of trying to get a diagnosis and find out what was going on. And I have a number of other associated conditions. I also have ADHD, and I deal with depression and anxiety and things like that. So, you know, I'm part of the community, but also it's just a community that is so underrepresented. It's 26% of the population and rising is disabled. And yet, when you look at representation in TV, the last numbers were something like 95% of characters on TV are non-disabled. And then when you go into that breakdown, in that breakdown, only 2% of those characters are played by disabled actors. So you're getting almost no representation of something that's more than a quarter of the population. And when you look at the history of disability and why that is, it's pretty horrifying. The way we have treated people in the last couple of years is even more horrifying. It's been really intense. And so to me, a lot of that is people don't think they know anyone who's disabled. They think that disability is binary. They think that it's you either are completely blind or you're not blind. And the reality is 90% of blind people have some vision. All of disability is on a spectrum and a scale. I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user, which means sometimes I am walking with no assistance, no devices, or maybe a brace on one of my legs or on my hip. Sometimes I'm using a cane, sometimes I'm using a wheelchair. Just because I'm using one or the other doesn't mean I'm better or worse. And I'm still me, I'm still doing the things I do. It's just, these are the things I need to go about my life. And it's like a pair of glasses. They're both assistive devices. And yet glasses are socially acceptable and wheelchairs aren't. So it really, you know, I don't want to get too heavy here, but it's often life and death in terms of whether or not people are thought of as human or not. 80% of doctors think that disabled people live inferior lives. And when you think about that, when you're talking about cycles of care, particularly when you're talking about life-saving cycles of care, that's a really scary thing to have somebody look at you and go, your life isn't worth as much as this other person, when they know nothing about your life. That's just like a baseline assessment of you don't have as much worth. And I think redefining our ideas of worth is a really important thing to do. So that sort of is where that came from. So I really committed to trying to improve representation in media in general, in TV and film, in tabletop gaming, in streaming, you know, and talking about it, being comfortable talking about it, like saying to people, you don't have to think that disabled is a bad word. It's not at all. It's like saying someone's tall or someone's short or someone has, you know, brown eyes. Disabled is a descriptor of, it's a factual, accurate descriptor of a person. And the big issues for us are access, visibility, information, equity in education, and language. You know, these are all things that are so, the discrepancies are just ignored. It's a community that is just invisible in so many ways because there are these stereotypes about what disability is and isn't, and it's got to change.
Do you feel
the only way that happens is people talk about it.
Do you feel that the pandemic and everything surrounding it has exacerbated the disinformation and discrimination against people with disabilities?
I mean, it certainly has brought it to the surface. And again, this is super scary and dark. But, you know, I bought a fake engagement ring because that was a thing that people were talking about, is like, this is a way that you may get care if you have to go to the ER. Because you will have, people will see you and say, oh, you have value to someone else and therefore you have value. When they might otherwise look at you and go, you're not even worth trying to save. And that was not like a wild assumption. There was a man named Michael Hickson in Texas, a Black man who had 4 kids and was married. He was quadriplegic, and the doctors denied him a ventilator. And there was an audio recording of the conversation with his wife where that happened. And their reasoning was that he has no quality of life. He was a man with 4 kids and a wife. And he died. He was denied a ventilator and they starved him to death.
Oh.
So this is not, you know, a theoretical, this is a practical concern. In California, where I live, disabled people were on the list to be vaccinated and then were taken off of the list for vaccinations. And I mean, just for reference, I'm immunocompromised. In the first phase of the pandemic, I went into quarantine before most people I knew. I was in quarantine, I live alone, for 396 days by myself, not able to leave for anything other than essential doctor's appointments. You know, and people are like, I'm so tired of it. I have pandemic fatigue. I'm going, oh, I'm aware. Trust me. I can't go to the supermarket. I don't get to sit outside and see my friends. I can't risk that. And your behavior, because you're tired, means that I'm going to live this forever, potentially. It's so upsetting what has happened, the way that disabled and chronically ill people have been dismissed and ignored. And that, you know, the other day, what was said about, it was encouraging that only people with 4 or more comorbidities were dying. And I'm like, you know that comorbidities can include things like acne or being pregnant. Like the things that are under the umbrella of comorbidities are not necessarily, first of all, what you think of, but second of all, that's my community that you're saying it's encouraging that we're dying. You've used us as tools the whole time to say that this is who we have to protect, and you're not protecting us in any way, shape, or form. It's terrifying. And the way that people are like, oh, only, you know, old people or vulnerable people are going to get sick and die. And you're going, but what? That's me. That's people I care about. Like, why is that okay? Why is my life worth less? And who are you to decide that? And people are forgetting that communities are completely interrelated. And that, you know, with long COVID, we're seeing a huge increase in the number of disabled people. And I think a lot of the fear around disability also comes from people kind of recognizing how they treat that community and being afraid of being part of a community that gets treated the way that they treat that community. Like, you know, it's a tricky situation. If we could get past that ableism, we could actually start doing something about it.
There's always going to be those people who their comfort level with a slight piece of cloth on their face is somehow worth more to them than someone else's life.
it's been really tough. And I'm so grateful. I have to say this. I'm so grateful for the disabled community. It is such an extraordinary group of people doing such phenomenal work on behalf of everyone, you know, but just kind of the support that we all gave each other throughout this. And, you know, as a community, we were actually pretty well equipped for a pandemic. You know, we were the folks who knew how to communicate over virtual communication tools. We were the people who had mutual aid networks set up already and sort of knew how to handle quarantining procedures and sterilizing procedures. This was stuff that we had to do in our everyday lives. So this wasn't something that was new to us, and we could help. Like, if people would actually listen to the disabled community who's been predicting every step of this whole process and knows how to deal with it, it really would change things a whole lot. It's really, you know, it's been really tough. This has been a really tough couple of years to see sort of what's always been under the surface being said out loud, and to hear that your life just has a whole lot less worth because you know, get around differently, or your body works a little differently, or you use, you know, different tools to communicate, or you have, you know, you're neurodivergent, whatever it is. Like, it's really been it's hard to say a lot that's positive on that front, but, you know, the community is remarkable. But if people want to, you know, want to learn about it, there's great material out there. Emily Ladau just wrote a book called Demystifying Disability. Alice Wong's book, Disability Visibility, is phenomenal. Yeah, there's a lot out there. And when you talk specifically about multiply marginalized people, like what this has done has just been, all it's done is make me recommit to working for equity for everyone.
I can definitely hope to do my part to get information like that out there in the future.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
So you've been very generous with your time. So I've got one last question before we go. It's a little bit of a lighter question, just to end it on a bit of a high note. It's the big question that we're asking all guests this season. If you could bring back any two people from the dead for 24 hours, who would you bring back and what would you do with them?
Wow. I think, let me see something.
Just doing some extra research off to the side.
Yeah, I want to think about if, so, I mean, there are a couple of things that I have to think about in the context of this. Like, if you brought somebody back who had lived 200 years ago, they would not know what the heck is going on. And you'd have to spend that entire time reacclimating them to what's happening. I mean, if you brought someone back from 5 years ago, they wouldn't know what the heck we're talking about. But you bring someone back who's had no experience with any of the modern technology, it's going to be, you know, spending a lot of time trying to do that. But I feel like what we need right now, I think someone like Jonas Salk would be a really important person to bring back to talk about the necessity for an understanding of community, global community, and the interconnectedness of human beings. Because we've gotten so selfish about medicine and the way we privatize it. And if we learned anything from this pandemic, it's that we have to have some sort of equal access to medicine, because if one person gets sick, everyone can get sick. And, you know, Salk was like, yeah, I'm not going to let anybody have a patent for my vaccine, because everyone needs to have access to it, because that's how we get rid of polio. So yeah, I think there's something there to the idea of bringing back somebody like Jonas Salk. But also, I feel like, you know, one of the great humanitarians from history. It's hard to pick one without getting you know, stepping on toes of different philosophical and religious groups, I think, in a lot of ways. But it would be really like, I feel like there are so many people out there who would have, we don't have so many philosophers in the same way anymore. And, you know, it would be interesting to see what someone like Aristotle would make of now. And where we are, or a great composer too would be really wonderful to bring someone back like Debussy or something like that, and have people have access to that kind of music again. But in 24 hours, it's what can you achieve in that time?
Yeah,
I don't know.
At the very least, somebody to put in perspective, what have we gained in all these achievements, and what have we lost at this moment?
Yeah, and obviously too, I'm looking at this from a very Western lens. You know, I think there are internationally so many great philosophers and artists that are, you know, worth looking at. I'd love to sit down with Borges personally. Like, I love Borges's work. I think it's so extraordinary, and it's inspired so much of what I try and do with my stuff. I feel like he'd be a really interesting dinner conversation to have. It's a tough question. It's a good one. What's your favorite answer you've gotten so far?
Probably the previous one that we actually did. Stay tuned for that one. It defies explanation.
It was the best answer we've gotten to any question ever.
He took the question in a very strange way. I didn't mean for things to get all serious with this one. I'm sorry, I bummed you out with this.
No. Look, here's the thing. The important thing about having these conversations is people have to understand why these conversations are important. And, you know, disability is not, it's not a super serious thing in our existences. Disabled people, like, we do all sorts of awesome stuff, like write adventures for Dungeons and Dragons, and, you know, create amazing art and music and star in movies, and just, we do, like, we have fantastic lives like other people. And we just need to start helping people understand that it's not this thing that they have to fear. It's not this nebulous idea that giving people equal access helps everyone. When curb cuts came into play because of the ADA in the 90s, that helps out people who have strollers or who have hand trucks full of tons of sodas to go stock a store. Like, universal design rocks. Captioning helps people for a whole bunch of different reasons. It's not just for deaf people.
I learned how to read at a high level from a very young age because my parents always put subtitles on while I was watching anything.
Yeah, exactly. It's so useful. And I think when people can recognize all of that, but also recognize that if you live long enough, at some point, you will belong to our community. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a change. It's not a tragedy. Like, everyone's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You're going, about what? That I get to, like, I get to do the jobs I dreamed of. I love what I do. That, you know, yes, there's stuff that the medical stuff can suck sometimes. Sometimes I really don't feel well. Sometimes I'm really tired, or I'm in a lot of pain, or I have to have surgery. But also, like, my life is my life, and I don't know any other body other than my own. And that's okay. The problem is that society is not built to be accessible, and that's the thing we can change and make better, and get these incredible contributions from this amazing community of people that are currently being systemically excluded. And we can do better. So yeah, learn about it, go help people out by learning and listening to the community, follow people like Alice Wong and Imani Barbarin, and like start learning about what we need and helping us have that access. So yeah, it's good stuff to have that going out there. It means a lot to me that people are, it's the weirdest thing. I know we're now over time, but like the weirdest compliment I've ever gotten is people coming to me and saying, I'm disabled because of you. Like, I never would say I was disabled before. It sounds like the weirdest compliment, but it's that people have been able to publicly acknowledge something about themselves that they always tried to hide, that they were ashamed of, that they weren't comfortable talking about. And now they're able to ask for the accommodations they need at work, and they're able to be more involved in the things they want to do, or they've gotten the assistive devices they need because they've seen that it's okay to use them, that they don't, it's better to have a cane than it is to try and stand and be in agonizing pain for hours. Like, so that to me now has become the greatest compliment, which I never thought that would be the case, but it really means a lot to me now that people are comfortable identifying and getting involved in the community because of the work I've done. And I'm excited, like we have stuff, I've been consulting on The Walking Dead, and there's some amazing stuff coming out with Clementine, the graphic novel for Clementine. I can't wait to share that stuff with people. It's so exciting. So yeah, it's that seeing yourself in stories, and disabled kids deserve to see themselves in stories too.
I always say this to veterans and such, but I gotta say thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And this has been amazing, fun, and definitely informative. I really think this helps a lot of people. So thank you so much for talking with us. And Jen Kretchmer, everybody. We'll be right back.
Oh, hey, thank you very much for watching. I'd like to thank Jen Kretchmer for coming on the show and being such an amazing and informative interview. We'd also like to thank Roach for stepping up to the task of doing the thing for the show. They don't usually prefer to be on camera, so I'm glad they had the gusto to do so. If you like what you saw, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and as always, it is what it is.